Welcome to Futuristic Tech Trends. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for notifications.
Hello everyone. In this video we will talk about the observer design pattern. It's a very commonly used design pattern, and it's also one of the most simplest ones, I would say. So we'll talk about we'll show you the block diagram. We'll talk about the real world examples of the observer pattern and also the class diagram and how you can implement this in a very simple and awesome way. I think uh, anyone whose concepts about the observer pattern are not yet clear, they will be 100% clear after watching this video. So let's move ahead. So the observer design pattern is actually a behavioral pattern. Of course, this means that something or some subject changes its state, and based on this state, the observers are notified. A list of observers are notified, you can say, and this list of observers is maintained in the subject. So subject can add an observer to the list or remove an observer from this list. Okay, the subject is also called an observable. It means that subject is the thing or the object that is to be observed. That is under the scanner of the observers. You know, so the as soon as the subject or some event happens in the observable, or the subject changes state, all of the observers are notified about this change, and that's actually the basic concept of observer pattern. Uh, so the relationship between the observable or the subject and the observers is one to many. So for one observable or one subject, there can be many observers. And as I said before, the we can add observers to the subject, and we can remove them. So it means there is a loose coupling between the observers and observable observable object. So at any time, an observer can be added, an observer can be removed, from the list of observers in the subject. Um so in real world, what examples do we have for observer pattern? Is one of the most common example is our social media platforms, which all of us almost daily use. In social media platforms, you have, let's say, one user, and which is called, let's say, user one, and all the other users, u2, u3, u4, can actually follow this user one. And so whenever this user one will uh, update its status or put a kind of a new link or a post, all the other users, just u2, u3, and u4, will get notified or updated about this new post that he has posted. The user one has posted. uh, and these examples of social media platforms are Facebook, Twitter, for example, the most commonly used. Also, Instagram. Instagram, Uh, the one other example, real world example, is also WhatsApp. These messaging apps, all the messaging apps. WhatsApp or Viber, whatever. Whenever you create, for example, a WhatsApp group, if any of the user posts something in this WhatsApp group or sends a message, then all other users which are observers are notified. This WhatsApp group is, of course, the subject. So no, the person who messaged in the WhatsApp group is the subject, and all the other participants of the WhatsApp group are actually observers. So of course this changes one observer becomes a subject, and all the other remain observers. They see the message. There is one big difference because many people confuse observer pattern with the publisher subscriber pattern. So there is one big difference between the observer pattern and the publisher subscriber method. Is this broker. In publisher scribes method, we also have a broker between our observable, that is subject, and the observers. It means that the observers do not directly register here in the publisher subscribe method. Instead, there is a broker in between, and observers have no idea about the observable, the subject, and the subject has no idea about the observers. There is this interface in between. So this is some kind of a messaging queue or something, uh, which is called the broker. In many cases, it can be a messaging queue. The subject will simply, post different topics or events on this messaging queue or bus, and the observers are subscribed or registered to particular messaging topics or events, and based on that, they will receive or they will be updated, based on which topic is, for example, being uh, uploaded to this messaging queue. So that's how the publisher scribe method and the observer method are different, because this is a very important thing, because many people confuse observer subscriber method with the observer method with the publisher subscribe method. So they should understand that there is a big difference, that in observer method there is no broker. The observers are registered directly at the observable or the subject, and the subject knows. There is loose coupling, but they can be registered and unregistered, but the subject knows what are its observers in case of observer method. In the case of the publisher subscriber method, there is a broker in between. So the broker is the place where observer registered are registered to different topics or events, and the subject is generating those events or topics on the bus. Subject is also registered the broker. So broker knows what are the subjects and which subjects, when it generates events or topics, what are the observers assigned to this subject, and vice versa. So that's the basic difference before we go on further to describe our observer pattern in detail. So how let's design our observer pattern. Like it's very simple. There will be, in the simplest form, let's say we will have one class which will be our subject class or observable class, and there will be another class which is called observers. So there will be a lot of objects of this observer class. So this subject class will contain a list, first of all, list of observers. List observers. Secondly, it will have a message to add observer, a function to add observer, a function to remove observer from the subject, and there will be another function to update the observers. Like, this function will loop over this list and update the observers, the observer that are added to the subject, update all those observers. And in the observer class, for example, we are going to have, for example, mainly the update function, which will be called here inside the update observer. For example, if this update function is a function which takes a string maybe, or whatever, message, or a message object, whatever, then this, when we loop over all the observers inside the subject class, we will write something like this object of the observer into update, and then we will put the message here, whatever the string message here. So whenever we loop over this over the list of observers inside our subject uh, class, we are going to call this update function call this update function of the observers inside the subject and then add our updated message. So now using these two concrete classes, I have in simple words, described the operation or how the observer pattern will be actually designed. So now we can add, for example, here an observer interface. This is an interface class observer, which will have, update function, of course, which is then implemented in this class, in the concrete observer class. We call it concrete class. Similarly, for subject also, we can either have an interface or an abstract class, whatever you find, you know, the best for you. You can also have an interface or you can have an abstract class. So of course, if it is an interface, there will be, the functions add observer, remove observer, or update observer here, you know, that will be implemented in the concrete subject, you know. Uh, and of course, there is a link between the interface, observer interface, and an interface of the subject or abstract class of the subject, because the subject, it maintains the state of the observers. It should have the object of the observers. As said, we will maintain a list of observers in the subject concrete class. So this is how the kind of architect of an observer pattern will look like. I hope it is explained in the best possible way. Now we can try to implement this observer pattern in the form of classes, of course. So as seen here, we will have four classes. One is going to be an interface or abstract class of the subject. One will be the interface of the observer, then one concrete class for the subject, and one concrete class of the observers. And of course then one main class which will use this pattern, this main class. So let's go and write our classes in Java or in any programming language. So we take an example, let's say, of a grandpa who is telling a story to his grandchildren. There is one grandpa, there is more than, which is a subject, there is more than one grandchildren who are observers. And grandpa is going to tell a story to his grandchildren. So this is a very interesting and simple example to understand the observer pattern. So we will write a pseudocode for this. And of course, you can run the pseudocode in, you can implement this anywhere in Java, in C Sharp, in whatever you like, C++, whatever. So let's start to implement this observer example. So first of all, we start with our interface, with our subject thing, the observable thing. So of course, we are going to have an interface class, which is going to be a grandpa class interface. And this interface will have, let's say, three functions. One is add kid, and let's say this class name is kid, which is whose object is k. And then remove kid function, which is also gonna take an object of the class kid and gonna remove it. And then we have an update function, which will, you know, send a string story to the kids, and, kind of update the kids with this story of kids. So this is our interface, subject interface. this grandpa class is our interface of the subject. Now let's implement. So let's implement this grandpa class, you know. So let's say this is our class. Let's call it real grandpa implements grandpa. Grandpa. So we are gonna implement all these functions. So to be quick, I wrote for you already. So we have first of all a list of this kid, which is our observer. We call this list kids, and we initialize it. Then we have a function called add kid. So in this add kid, we add an observer to this kid's uh, array list. Similarly, we have a remove kid implementation, kid k, and we will remove a kid from this array kids dot remove, and we pass a kids sorry a k object, an object of this kid observer class to this list to be removed. And last, we will implement this update function here. Now the update function is simply going to get a string which is story, and it's gonna loop over kids and then call for each of the observer or kids object this update function and pass this story string to it. Now let's implement our observer interface, which is the kid interface. So interface kids. This will simply have a function called update, and it will get a string, let's say s, and it's gonna simply print this s. You see this update function, which is called here uh, in our subject class. And then we have to implement this. So we have to implement our real observer class. So let's write it class real kid implements. So it implements kid, and of course it's an implementation of the update string s function, which is a story that is print s. Of course this print will not come here because in interface there will be only a declaration of this function here. So these are our four classes. One is the interface of the object, which is grandpa, then the implementation of the grandpa, which is real grandpa, and then we have the interface of the observer, which is interface kid, and then the implementation of the kid, which is real kid. Now we will have a main function in a main class where we will call all this, and we will use this observer pattern to add and remove observers, and then the grandpa tell the story to the kids that are observing at the moment. So we have this real kid class object k1. We have this real kid class object k2 is equal to new kid. We can have in the same way another object k3, and then we will have now one object of the real grandpa, real grandpa class grandpa is equal g1, which is equal to new grandpa. Okay, now what we will do, we will add, this is our subject grandpa, so g1 dot add k1. We will call then g1 dot add k2. Okay, and then we will call g1 dot update and put our story string in here. And what will happen? So what will happen? Let's say if we print here first of all the object name and then the story, then we will get the output as k1 colon story, whatever we will print as the story. Let's say we only print the story message, and k2 colon story. That will be the message. And also because there is k3 also, so k3 colon story. No, sorry, k3 will not come because we added only k1 and k2 in the list of our observers in the subject. So at the end, even if we add k1 dot add k3 we add, and we remove g1 dot remove, let's say k1, and then we again update g1 dot update, we call update function from our, you see here, from our subject, we call this update function, and we call this update with, let's say, uh, with a string bad story. Then what will we get? So this was our output for the first time. Output the second time, our output will be k2, because k2 is already added here, it was not removed. And then bad story will be our output, and also k3 colon bad story will be our output, you know. So because k2 was k1 was removed, so k1 will not be printed this time. So this is our whole implementation, you know. I hope you understand this. This is a very simple explanation. First of all, we have an interface of our subject grandpa, then we have an implementation of our grandpa, which was real grandpa, then we have our interface kid class, then we have an implementation of the real kid class. In the main class, what we did in the main class, we have an object k1 of real kid, object k2 of real kid, and object k3 of real kid. We created these three objects. Then we created an object of grandpa, g1. Then we added k1 and k2 to g1 to our subject, and then we updated the story. And what was printed? K1 colon story, k2 colon story was printed as output. Then what we did, we added g1, we added k3 kid to the g1 to the grandpa, and then we added, when we removed k1 kid from the grandpa, and then we updated g1 dot up dot with the bad story, and then we got printed this as our output, k2 bad story and k3 bad story. That is what is you know, how the observer pattern can be implemented. I hope the concepts are now clear. Thank you very much. And in the next lectures, I will be telling you about factory pattern, abstract factory pattern, and, you know, some other design patterns. Maybe we will also discuss about publisher subscribes pattern in detail, chain of responsibility pattern in detail also. So I hope you like the video. Please don't forget to subscribe and like the videos, and so that you can, if you subscribe to the channel, you will get the latest updates of my new videos. Thank you.
That was awesome, thank you.
Please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for notifications.